Okay. This is in the Australasian Journal. Well, let's see, one sec. Yeah. Okay, that's all the bookkeeping, I think, at the moment. This is Ontology and Arbitrariness by David Builes, I go with, Builes, forthcoming in the Australasian Journal of Philosophy. Yeah, so we're going to do some metaphysics. Let's find out. And as always, feel free to ask questions, whatever. I'm happy to get sidetracked. If not, whatever. We'll just stick to this. Let's find out what this is. It's my first time reading it, so here we go. Introduction. Many philosophers have wanted to avoid an ontology that is arbitrary. Why the hell would they do that? I mean, what would a non-arbitrary ontology even mean? Like a necessary one? So, like, if it's not like arbitrary, if ontology is necessary, I mean, that's already having overweight metaphysics. If you're going to say there needs to be certain things in the in your world, why would you assume to be able to have a necessary metaphysics? That's strange, actually. I mean, what are you going to say? Like, it's logically necessary? That's very strange. I mean, outside of maybe a few basic logical principles, you would actually assume it to be arbitrary otherwise. I don't know. We shouldn't think that simples arranged table-wise form a fusion, but simples arranged chair-wise do not. Oh, okay, so they're saying basically that you can't arbitrarily pick and choose what counts as a fundamental. Like, whatever's fundamental is fundamental, but you can't, it's not up to us. Okay, that makes more sense. We shouldn't think that the property of being a fork exists, but the property of being a knife does not. We shouldn't think that the proposition that grass is green exists, but the proposition that snow is white does not. Metaphysicians shouldn't be in the business of drawing these kinds of completely arbitrary ontological lines. I'm already like a little annoyed here. These are weird questions. I mean, yes, you shouldn't be doing weird things, and metaphysicians shouldn't be doing such weird things, but who really thought this is the sort of question that anyone was worried about? Why is this arbitrariness? Here's the real problem. A lot of times what philosophers do is they make up a problem and then they go about solving it. The problem was this a problem to begin with? Did anyone ever care to say that, okay, forks exist but knives do not? Like, was that ever a concern to anyone ever outside of this author? I don't know. But like they saying, well, the author now wants to say why you shouldn't be able to do stupid things like that. It's like, okay, but actually I'm not even sure that's an important answer. Because if no one actually thinks it's a problem, you're making up an answer to a problem that didn't exist. We'll find out. Okay. Author says, unfortunately, considerations of arbitrariness only seem to take us so far. They only push us toward opposite extremes. On one extreme, there is a maximalist view according to which all possible objects of a certain kind exist. On the other extreme, there is a minimalist view according to which no objects of the relevant kind exist. And any intermediate view must draw some kind of ontological line, and it is easy to worry that any such line, even a vague one, would be unacceptably arbitrary. However, even if one rules out intermediate views on arbitrariness grounds, one is still left with deciding between maximalist views and minimalist views. At this point, it seems like one must appeal to additional theoretical desiderata to decide the issue, and so philosophers who are otherwise united in their desire to have a non-arbitrary ontology must part ways. See, this is the problem. This is exactly what I mean. I'm rejecting this question. Why do we think this is an interesting question to decide what counts? The idea that we can actually decide what counts exists in the world may be already too much hubris on our part. We have to, live with what we can, sort of live with in terms of, an ontology. We have to get by. This is sort of a pragmatic view. But the idea that we are in a position to decide on criteria for things that exist in the world outside of a pretty minimal standard, I find to be overly metaphysically onerous. I don't think this is even a practical idea that we could do this. And now the idea that people want to do this, yeah, I can get that people want to be able to say, well, I know what exists in the world, but if you're gonna start trying to give criteria, I'm saying you're basically probably just full of shit. You think this goes back to the old cynical maxim when Diogenes was arguing with Plato. Plato was saying, look, a person is a two-legged hairless it's a hairless biped, and a featherless hairless biped, and Diogenes plucks a chicken and puts it down and says, behold, a man. And then Plato had to go in and say, oh, you motherfucking pre-roll ads. I just realized that they were running more pre-roll ads than I meant to. And now I put the warnings on, so now I see that they're going to run pre-roll ads again. I'm sorry, everyone out there. And then, okay. And so Diogenes puts a featherless chicken in front of Plato and says, behold, a man, according to your definition. And then Plato has to revise his his definition to say, okay, with wide, flat fingers, because, birds have pokey claws, and these are wide, broad nails, as opposed to the sharp nails of birds. And so this is the exact problem here. Can we actually define the sorts of things in the world? And the cynical position, the pragmatic position, is this is not the sort of thing we should be doing. This is not the right sort of business that we should be in. And so I'm already very suspicious of this whole project right here. Okay, author says, it would be nice if this wasn't so. And that's the people that were saying that they were forced into making weird decisions. Okay, it would be nice if anti-arbitrariness reasoning could go further by helping us decide between these two opposite extremes. Then philosophers who are united in their desire to avoid arbitrariness need not part ways. Anti-arbitrariness considerations alone could resolve the relevant ontological debates. You see, again, why the fuck do you think that you're going to solve an ontological debate with a theoretical rule about arbitrariness? Either arbitrariness or anti-arbitrariness. Again, this is the whole crux. Why would you think that this is even a rational thing to do? That you could just appeal to some arbitrariness criteria and resolve ontological debates? Very strange. Author's goal is to argue that this can be done. If they do it, they'd be extremely impressive, and I'm skeptical. Was it doubtful face? Yeah, okay. In particular, I will argue that there is a certain position in the philosophy of mathematics which itself is primarily motivated on the basis of anti-arbitrariness concerns that decides many of these ontological debates in favor of the minimalist. Of course, some philosophers might have independent reasons to avoid this position in the philosophy of mathematics. However, my main goal is to show that an argument for minimalism over maximalism can be given purely on the grounds of anti-arbitrariness. Okay. 2. Indefinite extensibility and arbitrariness. In order to avoid intolerable arbitrariness, many philosophers of mathematics have been attracted to the claim that certain kinds of entities are indefinitely extendable. There are many different ways to understand the thesis of indefinite extensibility. For our purposes, we will be focusing on a modal version of the thesis defended by Øystein Lindboe. Consider the question of whether pluralities of objects can form a set. Lindboe has argued that necessarily anything whatsoever can form a set. So this says set of indefinite extensibility, SIE, it is necessary that any plurality, that's what this XX means, I don't know if you can see it, it's possible that there is a Y such that the Y is a set, and for all the X's that are part of the grouping of the XX's, that plurality, that X is an element of Y. So that means basically, okay, they'll say what it, are they going to say what it is? Alright, so before, they'll explain it, but basically it's saying if you have a plurality of things, so you've got one among many, then you can form a set of that many, or that those objects form a set. And that's what they mean by pluralities here. Okay, before we turn to defending this principle, an immediate question arises as to how one should interpret the modal operators here. Yeah, because mixing this double X thingy right over here and the modal operator right here, that's non-standard. Yeah. After all, in any standard view according to which the ontology of mathematics is metaphysically necessary, interpreting the modal operators as expressing metaphysical necessity would collapse SIE into a paradoxical non-modal analog. However, there are a number of ways of interpreting these modal operators that sidestep this issue. See, I'm not an expert in this area, so I don't have any idea what this, that it would be paradoxical immediately, but okay. Like, whatever they say. Linnebaugh himself interprets the modal operators as involving a primitive kind of set-theoretic modality, according to which there could be more sets than there actually are. Hartree Field, I assume, Field 1993, endorses a notion of conceptual possibility, according to which it is conceptually contingent with which mathematical objects there are. Bertrand Russell endorses a notion of logical possibility, according to which facts about ontology are never logically necessary. We may also interpret the relevant notion of possibility as a kind of idealized conceivability, defended by Chalmers, so that'd be David Chalmers, I guess. Although I think there is another Chalmers nowadays. Philosopher, that is. Lastly, there are a number of contemporary philosophers who have argued that even if the ontology of mathematics is metaphysically necessary, there is a perhaps more interesting, broader notion of real possibility, according to which the ontology of mathematics is contingent. Okay, yeah, so like there's ways of like thinking about math where it could be other than it is. Like we could have like it could be constructed out of like our ideas, and therefore if our psychology was different, maybe mathematics would be different. I mean, that's a idea that could be, you know, pushed, but a lot of mathematicians sort of think that math is real and necessary on its own. It has nothing to do with our psychology. Okay. In any case, when we are engaged in the business of deciding between rival metaphysical positions regarding mathematical ontology or mereology or many other metaphysical disputes, there is certainly some sense in which we may intelligibly and coherently entertain different metaphysical hypotheses, even if these rival metaphysical hypotheses do not turn out to be genuine metaphysical possibilities. In what follows, you may interpret the modal operators of the SIE in whatever way you wish to precisify this intuitive idea, but I will be using the term logically possible and conceivable more or less interchangeably. Back to SIE. Why believe it? SIE is attractive because it gives a principled, non-arbitrary answer to the question of which objects can coherently form sets, any objects whatsoever. Moreover, SIE is entirely immune to the set-theoretic paradoxes. SIE is in no way clashes with the purely mathematical fact that there is no set of all sets. The existence of such a set would directly contradict the axiom of regularity, since the set of all sets would have to contain itself. However, this mathematical fact is entirely irrelevant to the claim that for all things, it is logically possible or conceivable that they form a set. When one is conceiving of a set that contains all of the actual existing sets, one is conceiving of a set that is in no way intrinsically paradoxical. For example, it does not contain itself. Yeah, so I guess they're saying by throwing the modal in front of it, you're saying, look, it's conceivable that it exists, even though it couldn't possibly actually exist. So like a paradoxical thing, you can conceive of paradoxical things in some way, even if they don't actually exist in the world. So it says you can like conceive of, you know, like an impossible mountain. So like for instance, there are things that can exist in our reality because they're like they would a ball of uranium like 3 miles wide would immediately explode. But you can sort of imagine like a metal ball 3 miles wide. Like that's not a hard thing to actually think of. But like if that ever actually existed in our reality, you'd have an immediate nuclear explosion because it would just be too heavy and collapse in on itself and, you know, vaporize everything nearby. But like, yeah, but see, the idea here is that they're using the modal to block the paradox, because you can't you'd have to instantiate somehow inside the modal operator, and that gets real tricky. And they're saying, and they did some hand waving up here, they don't want to explain how they're blocking the paradox, but by throwing the modal in front of it, you can sort of do that. And they dodged it, and you can see this was up here, they're dodged. Now, how badly you want to hammer them for this depends how much you have weighing on your how much you want to like slam them for that. But you know, this is a somewhat standard move. Like you can block paradox by embedding it in a certain way, and then you don't actually have the paradox. You have an embedded version of it. And so if you can't actually get into the embedded version of it, then you don't actually have a paradox, even though you have like the structure of a paradox. So this is one way of dealing with paradox. It's not a solution for it. It's just a way of blocking it in a particular case. So yeah. So if you have more questions about how to block paradoxes with modal operators, well, we can discuss that too, but not really. I doubt anyone actually cares? But yeah, so this is the sort of thing that they're doing, though. They're trying to hide their paradox behind in a black box, which is the modal box. Okay. So, but basically they're saying anything that can form a plurality of things can be a set then. Okay, so author says, anyone who denies SIE faces a explanatory challenge. And SIE just says anything that forms a plurality of things can form a set. How could there just be some things such that it is logically impossible or inconceivable that they form a set? Just as intermediate views in mereology must draw a line between those pluralities that form fusions and those that do not, deniers of SIE must draw a line between those pluralities that can coherently form sets and those that cannot. Prima facie, however, it seems that for any things, it is easily conceivable that they form a set. After all, a set is completely characterized by its members, so specifying some plurality of objects seems to completely characterize some corresponding set. Deniers of SIE need to provide an explanation for why it is logically impossible for certain pluralities to form a corresponding set, otherwise their position is objectionably arbitrary. Okay, I want you to know something right here. What the fuck is a plurality? They didn't say. They didn't say once. They just went and did this right here. They just used the double X operator right here. All right. So I don't know how well this is showing up on you, but you can just see they just have the double X operator. I'm looking at it like on what you guys are seeing. I'm trying to see how small it is, but like they just went ahead and used this. You don't see any definition of a plurality anywhere else. They're just using it. And so, I mean, they did reference Linnebaugh. I don't know what Linnebaugh said in like these papers, but they're basically arbitrarily saying, oh, if it's a plurality, it's a set. And then they're saying, okay, why is it logically impossible for if you have a plurality that you can't make a set out of a plurality? Well, I don't know, but you didn't actually specify accurately what a plurality is. And so maybe you're using plurality as the exact same thing as a set at this point. Generally they don't, but it means a grouping of like similar things, but already you may have embedded or preconceived or assumed some understanding of set. And so this is a little bit unfair already because they didn't define plurality. They're just using some sort of standard background theory of it and saying, well, anyone else has to go ahead and tell me what is why their concept of plurality does not form a set. Okay. Anywho, according to defenders of indefinite extensibility, this explanatory challenge has not been met. Perhaps the most common response to this challenge among deniers of SIE is that some pluralities are too big to form sets. So that's Lewis and Burgess. It is then often claimed that what it is to be too big is to be equinumerous with the plurality of all ordinals, I guess that the infinite symbol maybe, that actually exist. Or I don't know math, so I don't know what some of the math is here. Linnebaugh has argued that this common view does not meet the explanatory challenge as follows. Consider the question of why there are not more ordinals than 00. For instance, why cannot the plurality of 00 form a set, which would then be an additional ordinal, larger than any member of 00? According to the view under discussion, the explanation is that 00 are too many to form a set, where being too many is defined as being as many as 00. So the proposed explanation moves in a tiny circle. The threshold cardinality is what it is because the cardinality of the plurality of all ordinals, but the cardinality of this plurality is what it is because of the threshold. I conclude that the response fails to make any substantial progress and that the proposed threshold remains arbitrary. Yeah, so it's like, well, if you get to this limit, you're over the limit, and that's what makes it the limit. So it is an arbitrary limit there. But, that doesn't mean actually it's an arbitrary limit. If you place it anywhere, it's arbitrary. That just means there is a limit, but you'd have to justify that on other grounds, I guess. Alright. In the absence of a compelling answer to this explanatory challenge, those metaphysicians who wish to avoid arbitrariness ought to endorse SIE. I guess, but again, like I just said, that there is a limit might not be a problem. Where you put it would be arbitrary, I guess, but that there is one, maybe that's what the challenge would be. Okay, from SIE, it is easy to derive the following claim, which will prove to be important for many of the arguments below. So this is cardinal indefinite accessibility. I don't know. All right, so there's some limit here. that whatever limit you're at, I guess that's what kind of that's the size of your set. So, in words, CIE is the claim that necessarily for any cardinals, those sets which correspond to the different sizes of infinity, there could be a larger cardinal. Yeah, so you could, no matter how big your plurality is, you could, a grouping of things, you could get a bigger one. In order to prove CIE from SIE, let the plurality of x's be any plurality of cardinals. Either there is a largest cardinal in the plurality or there isn't. If there is, call it kappa. It is a consequence of the standard ZFC axioms in set theory that for every cardinal kappa there exists a strictly larger cardinal. So if the standard ZFC axioms themselves guarantee the existence of a larger cardinal than each of the plurality of x's. Next, suppose there is no largest cardinal in the x's. Then by SIE, there could be a set whose only elements are everything that is an element of one of the x's, plurality. The set would just be the union of the cardinals in X, so since every union of cardinals is itself a cardinal, it would be a cardinal greater than all of the cardinals in X's as desired. Yeah, so basically you'd get to the biggest one and then you'd put that in a plurality itself, and then you'd have something bigger than the one before because it would include that one itself. Okay, so standard sort of just induction on size or whatever. Okay, with SIE and CIE in hand, we are ready to argue for minimalist views over maximalist views in a variety of ontological debates. Okay, so again, I don't know the set theory well enough to argue that if any of this actually makes sense. Large cardinals or even any size cardinals are beyond me. Math isn't my thing. The question is, what exactly do you mean by pluralities, and then why do you think they form sets at that point? And then once you make them into sets, you get this result here via, I guess, this argumentation. So, but that's fine. Mathematical objects. Which abstract mathematical objects, if any, exist? According to a minimalist view, there are no mathematical objects. According to intermediate views, some logically possible mathematical objects exist and others do not. Perhaps, for example, the real numbers exist, but the complex numbers do not. Or perhaps differentiable manifolds exist, but rings do not. Or perhaps countable sets exist, but uncountable sets do not. Mark Balaguer and Linsky and Zalta have argued in favor of maximalist views of mathematical ontology. According to Balaguer, the ordinary actual existing mathematical objects exhaust all of the logical possibilities for such objects. That is, there actually exist mathematical objects of all logically possible kinds. That is, that all the mathematical objects that logically possibly could exist actually do exist. That is, the mathematical realm is plenitudinous. Yeah, so anything that could exist does exist in math is basically the claim there. Anti-arbitrariness concerns push one towards maximalism or minimalism views. Just as it seems arbitrary to draw a line between those material objects that form fusions and those that do not, it seems arbitrary to draw lines between those possible mathematical structures that exist and those that do not. And for people who don't know what fusions are, this is coming out of the mereology discussion. Mereology being the philosophy of parts and wholes. And so here's the thing. Is my right hand and part of me? Yes. Now, if you take the part that's my right hand and the part that's not my right hand, the rest of my body, you can get the whole thing is a fusion of my whole body is a fusion of my right hand and the rest, and like the not right hand part of my body. And so like it would be arbitrary to say that my right hand doesn't like you can't say like what counts as like a combination of things. Like if you draw a line between those material objects that form fusions, like my right hand and the rest of my body, and those that do not, like why would you say like, well, my right hand and the rest of my body form a fusion, but like not my pinky nail and the rest of my hand, that does not form a fusion. That would be weird to say that my pinky nail is not part of my hand. Undetected no gray zero parts? Yes. Or am I no gray zero? I forget. Yeah, exactly. So this is yeah, like I said, we're doing some like heavy metaphysics. Undetached. Yes, we're Gava guy at this point. We're part rabbit, or part duck rabbit, as it were. Yeah. Okay, but that's what. If you have any question on fusion, I don't know any real mereology, but like basically it's just like they have like interesting questions, like weird questions, like is there a fusion of me and the chair I'm sitting on? Is like can you call that one whole object? Well, at that point you're getting you might say it's arbitrary, but like if you accept that you can like arbitrarily break up my hand, then why can't you break up like me and the chair, or then me not and me and the chair, and then me not in the chair? It's like you can talk about objects any which way you want. So, is the chair an undetached no zero part? Maybe. But yeah, these are metaphysical questions. Yeah. So it says so if you're thinking that you can have parts of people, that like you can arbitrarily break up parts of people, why are you thinking you can't have like arbitrary mathematical structures for the same reasons? Okay. However, the relevant maximalist view is inconsistent with SIE. If there is a plenitude of all possible mathematical objects, then there is a plenitude of all possible pure sets. Informally, there is a plenitude of pure sets just in case there couldn't be more pure sets than there actually are. We formalize this as the follows. So you've got a plenitude, so you take all the sets and you make a plenitude of where all the x's, you got a grouping of things that are sets, and you take them all together. After all, if there could be a further pure set, then it should actually exist if maximalism is true. We can now present our argument against maximalism as follows. If maximalism is true, set plenitude is true. SIE is true. If SI is true, set plenitude is false. Therefore, maximalism is false. The argument is clearly valid. I've argued in favor of premises 1 and 2. It is easy to see that premise 3 is true. Take the plurality of all pure sets SS that there are. According to SIE, there could be a distinct pure set, namely one whose members are exactly that set, including that one. This contradicts set plenitude. Yeah, so if you then can make a set out of that one bigger one, then you get a Russell-style paradox of the where you have a universe of sets, like the whole thing. Then you say, is the universe inside itself? And then, of course, if you have all the things that were already there, and then you say, yes, is the universe inside itself? Then you have the universe being inside of itself, and then you'd have to do again another set that would be bigger to have that set inside it too, and you get yourself into a paradox, a contradiction. Yeah, so it's a universal set, and this is basically, just a universal set argument, and you can't have any universal sets. Okay, the intuitive idea behind this style of argumentation is straightforward. The maximalist tries to have all of the mathematical objects that there could possibly be. However, according to SIE, there is no sense to be made of all the mathematical objects that could possibly be. No matter how many mathematical objects there could always be more. It is simply an illusion that there is a coherent minimalist position and a coherent maximalist position. There is only a coherent minimalist position. Therefore, considerations of anti-arbitrariness should push us toward holding a minimalist position. Okay, so basically, they're trying to force the maximalist into a universal set situation, that if everything exists, then you can, always do does that exist in a grouping of all the things? And that this comes back to, what do you mean by a grouping of all the things in the sense of pluralities? And again, they did not define how pluralities are defined, and so I don't know if you can actually legally or like metaphysically include sets as pluralities, but that's what this line here says. And so here's the question: what exactly is a plurality, and can you have a plurality of sets? Yeah. Well, welcome to the philosophy of mathematics and metaphysics, friends. This is what you do. Other abstract objects. The same style of arguments can be generalized to a wide range of controversial abstract objects. In each case, the maximalist tries to have all possible abstract objects of a certain kind, but such a position is ultimately illusory. No matter how many abstract objects of that kind there might be, there could always have been more. Consider, for example, the case of propositions. Are there any? Minimalists say there are no propositions. However, if one does believe in the existence of propositions, one shouldn't just believe in 3 or 4 of them. Instead, one should endorse a maximalist view according to which there is a plenitude of propositions. In particular, one should at least endorse the following. Proposition plenitude. If it is possible that there be some cardinal kappa, then there is the proposition that there are exactly kappa many angels. After all, if there were some upper limit to the number of angels that propositions could describe, then such an upper limit would be wholly arbitrary. Unfortunately, CIE and proposition plenitude imply a contradiction. Let any proposition of the form there are exactly kappa many angels be denoted by pk. Let pp be the plurality of all such propositions. By CIE, there could be some cardinality lambda strictly greater than every cardinal kappa, such that there is some proposition of the form pk in pp. By propositional plenitude, there exists a proposition of the form p lambda. However, such a proposition is not one of the pp, even though pp is supposed to include every proposition of the form p kappa for some kappa. We have reached a contradiction. Wholly arbitrary, yeah. Wholly arbitrary, Batman. Well, again, welcome to metaphysics. Yeah, so basically, this is every time it's like what they're doing here is they're basically making universal sets. Anytime you want to get to a limit, you say, look, you take that whole thing and you ask, is it a member of itself? But it wasn't a member of itself because that was all the things you said. And once you say, well, it's one of all the things, then you automatically break it because you have one more thing now. So, yeah. But I mean, is this a good idea? Maybe this is a good idea. Maybe maximalism is a bad idea because this is okay. But I'm just worried that there's some ambiguity in plurality, the understanding of plurality here that we have not uncovered, and that's really what we're getting at. So it's like, okay, yeah, if you want to have a very set-like view of cardinality, then of course we're going to have a very set-like problem when you get to universal sets. But like, that's not very deep, but again, you have to separate out what do you mean by plurality at that point. Okay, author says, let us turn to another example. Are there any properties? Here we need to draw an important distinction. Following Lewis 83 and many others, we should distinguish between an abundant and sparse conception of properties. According to a sparse conception of properties, only certain highly or perfectly natural properties exist, perhaps those given in fundamental physics. According to an abundant conception, properties may be as disjunctive or gerrymandered as one likes. So yeah, you could have maybe charge as a fundamental property, but like yellow might be something else, like a combination of however many properties that make what it is to be yellow. Oh, you meant the angels? Well, but of course, they were using that example because to highlight, the arbitrariness of the size. For those who don't know, I mean, the medieval philosophy is parodied by, they laugh at it because they used to argue about how many angels could fit on the head of a pin. And the idea that you could, set a size limit to how much space angels take up. Well, they were parodying the poor medievals. The medievals didn't deserve that. The medievals were good philosophers. But yeah, I mean, this is the history of philosophy. What happened during the Enlightenment was basically a lot of Europeans basically saying we're a lot smarter than we used to be. Whether that was justified or not, that's what they did, and so they were parodying the medievals for these sort of like arbitrary metaphysics. And that's what the author here was doing for rhetorical purposes again. So, but yes, thank you, Valpo. Yeah, this is funny. I haven't seen anything rhetorically make use of that. Oh, wow. They actually had to put a footnote on this. So footnote 5 here. The use of angels here and throughout is inessential. One may instead consider the proposition that there is a kappa-dimensional space-time, or the proposition that there are kappa many island universes. Oh, there's an anti-history philosophy paper and inquiry? Yeah, that'd be fun for a roulette reading too, if like it's anti-history. But yeah, like this is interesting down here. I doubt it's showing up easy on your screen, but like they're basically saying, look, they got nervous. I wonder if like a reviewer hit them for this, or if they just got nervous for doing something rhetorically cutesy. And so then they said, oh, you can make this more serious and say, look, making space-time of kappa dimensions. And so, like, giving a physical analog. There's an anti-history of philosophy paper. I wonder what that is. Yeah, have to take a look. Okay. Yeah, reviewer footnote. So, because it's a completely dumb footnote. Like, why would you put this in except if someone was complaining about your example? And it's so easy for them to fix it that this was like a reviewer just was like, I don't like this. So, yeah. Anywho. So, there is no argument against the existence of a sparse collection of perfectly natural properties from indefinite extensibility considerations, since there is no good reason for believing in a corresponding pair of plenitude and indefinitely extensible claims for such properties. Yeah, I mean, why would you... The world may have a limited number of properties in it, and like we're just built up out of like, you know, atoms with a few different kinds of properties, and then just the way they combine gets more and more complex, and you know, that seems like a pretty standard view. And it's been going back to the Greeks, where the atoms, of course, is a Greek term for, you know, the single thing at the bottom of reality that has properties. So this is not a new or unusual view. Okay. So on the other hand, the author says, however, are there any abundant properties? The minimalist says no. The maximalist, on the other hand, should endorse the following principle. And remember, abundant properties could be any grouping of these things is also a fundamental property too. And so property plenitude, if it is possible that there be some cardinal number kappa, then there is the property of being in a world with at most k angels. So like that'd be the property of being at the most k kappa angels at that point. Okay, and again, however, the property plenitude falls into contradiction with CIE for the same reasons that property plenitude does the same thing as proposition plenitude. It gets the same contradiction because you could always have that property of being in a world with at most kappa angels. You could throw that, again, that property of that limit being in there in that world, and then you have another property that would break your the limit right there. Okay, let us go through one last example. Are there any possibilia? For example, is there anything that is my possible twin? Minimalists say no. Maximalists in the form of necessitism say yes. Necessitism, defended by Williamson, Goodman, and others, is the view that necessarily everything is necessarily something. Informally, necessitism is the view that it is necessarily what there is. Necessitists should endorse the following principle. Modal plenitude. If it is possible that there be some cardinal number kappa, it is possible that there are exactly kappa many angels. Unfortunately, modal plenitude is inconsistent with CIE and SIE. Given necessitism, modal plenitude implies that if it is possible for there to be some cardinality kappa, then in the actual world there are at least kappa many things. Now consider all of the things in the actual world, the TT. It is possible that they form a set by SIE, so that's a plenitude of all of the things in the actual world. So it's possible that there is a cardinality that is the cardinality of that set. We'll call that lambda. By CIE, it is possible that there is some larger cardinal lambda plus. By modal plenitude, it is possible that there to be exactly lambda plus distinct angels. By necessitism, it follows that there are at least lambda plus objects in the actual world. This contradicts the fact that the cardinality of all the objects in the world is lambda. So again, doing the same thing again, whatever the thing is, then you get yourself one more by just taking the structure of things at the whole. Like if you take all the things at once, that wholeness of all the things at once counts as a thing again. By now, the pattern should be familiar. Similar arguments can plausibly be run, for example, on Maximal's views about the existence of fictional characters. Perhaps for every cardinal kappa, there could be a fictional character who strongly desires that the world includes exactly kappa angels. Another argument can be run on the existence of abstract sentence types. Infinitary logic, for example, is the study of sentences of arbitrary cardinal length. Maximal's views, which seek to posit the existence of sentence types corresponding to the sentences of these kinds of languages, are also vulnerable to this kind of argument, and the list goes on. Okay, is there any question on this stuff? I don't think this is particularly crazy, but like it's like basically just saying, look, if you can do this plenitude stuff, then you can run into contradictions at maximalist viewpoints. Okay, it looks like their argument holds on that. I'm not sure what the point is, but like beyond that, which is fine. It's like, okay, they're anti-maximalists and they've made their point, I think. All right, concrete objects. One might naturally think that this style of argument can only be run against the existence of abstract objects, but that would be a mistake. Okay, so now they're going to make it a bit more down to earth. They're going back to the mereology. Consider the famous statue and lump, which are made of the same matter and occupy the very same spatio-temporal location. And for those who might not know, the statue and the lump is you have a lump of clay, and the sculptor is going to make that lump of clay into a statue. So conceivably, all the clay that's already there is in the spot it's going to be, because the sculptor is just going to cut away from the lump. And so basically, you could think of like a stone lump. And so they can only cut away. They can't add anything. And so the statue's already there, and the lump is on the out. The whole lump is the whole thing. And once they cut it away, the lump will then look like the statue. But it's the same matter, and they occupy the very same spatio-temporal location. The lump just has all the matter around it too. Okay, there's prima facie pressure to say that they are distinct. After all, the lump could survive being squashed, but the statue could not. So it seems that their essential properties differ. We must then ask exactly how many objects are located exactly where the statue is located. According to the minimalist view, there is only one object, or perhaps zero if mereological nihilism is true. According to intermediate views, perhaps there are only two such objects, the statue and the lump, or perhaps there are 17 or 2,521 such objects. According to a maximalist view defended by Yablo, Fine, Johnston, Kozlicki, and Fairchild, there are a plenitude of material objects located exactly where the statue is located. The basic idea is that the statue and lump have different essential profiles, different sets of essential properties. So instead of thinking that there are only two essential profiles had by two distinct objects, maximalists think that any collection of properties had by the statue should count as the essential profile of some distinct object located exactly where the statue is. And now we see the point. These people are famous people nowadays that this person is arguing against, and they get to argue now with their mathematical stuff from above that all these people here are wrong, okay? And now we understand why they spent all that time parodying these mathematical arguments that may not have seemed all that important, because now we're talking about actual objects, what people say about actual objects, and this author now has shifted to attack a metaphysical view that is probably much more widely held. So this is interesting. They were able to convert their argument into a much more widely applicable argument. So this is very impressive in terms of arguing from an abstract premise or beginning in having a more concrete, grounded conclusion. Okay, but that's good on them for doing something like that. So again, for those who don't know, this is on the Australasian Journal of Philosophy. The Australasian Journal of Philosophy is a very highly well-regarded philosophy journal, so I haven't read anything in it on Roulette in a while. Usually they're longer articles, and I don't read like super long articles, but like the idea that you can pull this sort of thing off, it's a little bit more impressive than some of the other stuff, which is more narrowly focused. This is all of a sudden just took a shotgun to like what you thought was like, a pea shooter above, maybe who cares about like that sort of mathematical view. It just turned into like the barrel of the gun got a lot bigger because they're taking out a whole swath of other sort of theories with their argument above. Okay. Again, the primary motivation for maximalist views is anti-arbitrariness. Intermediate views need an account of exactly which properties count as the essential profile of some co-located object and which don't. Maximalists need not draw any arbitrary lines. In order to not draw any lines, the maximalist should endorse the following: essential plenitude. If it is possible that there be some cardinal number kappa, then for any concrete object C, there is an object C sub kappa that is co-located with C and has the essential property of being in a world with at most kappa angels. Just as before, essential plenitude can easily be shown to be inconsistent with SIE and CIE. One last case. Are there any concrete possible worlds? Minimalists say there is only the actual world. If one does believe in other concrete possible worlds, however, one shouldn't believe that there are just 17 of them. Instead, they're missing a period here. Instead, one should endorse a maximalist view according to which there is a plenitude of possible worlds. In particular, one should at least endorse the following: world plenitude. If it is possible that there be some cardinal number kappa, then there is a possible world in which there are exactly kappa many angels. Again, as before, CIE and SIE imply that world plenitude is false. And so here's what they did. They did the, they knocked out the metaphysicians talking about like actual objects, and then they took their view on the multiple world quantum view in physics, in philosophy of physics and physics. So this is like the, possible worlds. Are they all real? Are like the infinite number of possible realities that you might hear in like a physical thing where, you take a wormhole to like another possible world. Is there an infinite number of them? Is it just like you could be any number, like arbitrary? This person now just took aim at the physicists. And so this is interesting because not only did they take aim at the metaphysicians that are talking about concrete objects, they're aiming at the physicists now too. Okay, a Lewisian response. The argument schema that I have so far been developing has important precursors. For example, in The Plurality of Worlds, David Lewis considers a challenge from Forrest and Armstrong to the effect that natural recombination principles on the space of worlds entrap modal realism in paradoxes akin to those that refute naive set theory. Yeah, so this is what we've been talking about. You're talking about something that's real, and you're, arguing that there's a problem with set theory. I was saying above that there's no universal set, and that's what a paradox of naive set theory. The recombination principle that Forrest and Armstrong proposed is substantially different from any principle that I have discussed so far, and it is a matter of controversy whether it successfully refutes a plenitudinous version of modal realism. Nevertheless, Lewis's response to the threat of inconsistency is instructive. Here is how he responds. All right, this is a big quote. My proviso, if spelled out, would have to put some restriction on the possible size of space-time. Among the mathematical structures that might be offered as isomorphs of possible space-times, some would be admitted and others would be rejected as oversized. Forrest and Armstrong say that such restrictions seem to be ad hoc. Maybe so. The least arbitrary restriction we could possibly imagine is none at all, and compared to that, any restriction whatever will seem at least somewhat ad hoc. But some will seem worse than others. A restriction to 4-dimensional or to 17-dimensional manifolds looks badly arbitrary. A restriction to finite-dimensional manifolds looks much more tolerable. Maybe that is too much of a restriction and disqualifies some shapes and sizes of space-time that we would firmly believe to be possible. If so, then I hope there is some equally natural break a bit higher up, high enough to make room for all the possibilities we really need to believe in, but enough of a natural break to make it not intolerably ad hoc as a boundary. If study of the mathematical generalizations of ordinary space-time manifolds revealed one salient break, and one only, I would dare to say that it was the right break, that there were worlds with all the shapes and sizes of space-time below it, and no worlds with any other shapes and sizes. If study revealed no suitable breaks, I would regard that as serious trouble. If study revealed more than one suitable break, I would be content to profess ignorance, incurable ignorance most likely. We might call this view intermediate realism about possible worlds, in contrast to maximalism and minimalism about possible worlds. Intermediate realism views concede that a maximalist ontology is impossible, and instead they attempt to draw an ontological line between those logically possible objects that exist and those that do not. You can see that Lewis was trying to be empirical here. And that's an interesting way to say, look, there may be something in the world that makes that draws an arbitrary line, and that wouldn't really be a problem if there was something in physical reality that just said, look, this is how it is. It's like, you get so big and you don't get any bigger because it collapses in on itself, and that would be something discoverable by us. Maybe, Okay. Author says, for any philosopher who wishes to avoid arbitrariness, the tenability of intermediate realism hinges on there being a unique, non-arbitrary, suitable break in logical space. Yeah, something you could find, empirical, corresponding to the kind of object in question. In the absence of any suitable break, any version of intermediate realism would be wholly arbitrary. In the presence of multiply equally salient suitable breaks, the intermediate realist would still be saddled with an arbitrary choice between them. Even if the intermediate realist wishes to remain agnostic between these multiple breaks, as Lewis does, they must still think that the world's true ontology, whichever break it happens to correspond to, is ultimately arbitrary. There's something I think this is slightly unfair. Lewis was saying it's an empirical question. Calling it something empirical ultimately arbitrary might not be completely fair to Lewis. Because, look, what's the, whatever the number of atoms, protons there are in uranium, for example. You can count it up. It doesn't really matter what it was. It's just that, different atoms have different kinds of numbers of protons in them. Is that ultimately arbitrary? We don't call that arbitrary. We call that an empirical fact. It's something we discovered about the world. Now, there are lots of different atoms, and they have different numbers and different stable states. Or is that arbitrary? Not really. It is an empirical fact again. And so there might be a slight problem here dealing with non-abstract objects. When you're talking about real objects, you could call it arbitrary, but, nature is arbitrary. It's that we go and discover it. It's okay, that's not a problem. Now, that the universe exists might be ultimately arbitrary or beyond our ability to know exactly what's going on. Why did God create the universe? The same sort of question as how many angels can fit on the head of a pin. But is it ultimately arbitrary? It may just be something beyond what we can learn. Now, what the author was saying before, when it comes to these things that are theories, then I agree with the author. But when it comes to nature, I am more sympathetic to. Lewis. I'm not sympathetic to Lewis's view really, but I'm not buying this author's argument wholeheartedly either. I could be. I don't know if I'm sympathetic to a view I haven't thought about, and I don't know if I've ever thought about this before. Anyway, as Lewis also notes, there are also epistemological worries about intermediate realism. If there is no theoretical reason for preferring one break over some other, then it's hard to see how any belief about where such a break lies could ever be justified. Again, there may just be things about our world we don't know, but yeah, if you prefer one over the other, then that would be arbitrary. That doesn't mean we're going to get a firm answer. Okay. So is there a unique non-arbitrary break for the kinds of objects that we have been considering? One shouldn't expect a simple uniform answer to this kind of question. Depending on one's first-order views, different proposals will be more or less attractive. For example, perhaps some version of finitism is a defensible philosophy of mathematics, in which case it would be reasonable to believe in only finitary mathematical structures. In the case of possible worlds, some philosophers have defended the view that the space of metaphysically possible worlds coincides with the space of nomologically possible worlds. Again, so there's what is scientifically possible as far as our best understanding of science? That's an empirical fact, or empirical question. Combining modal realism with this kind of view would easily avoid any set theoretic paradoxes. Assessing these and other intermediate realist views is beyond the scope of this paper. The important point to make here is that it is intermediate realism rather than maximalism which deserves to be the main rival to a minimalist ontology. Okay, fair. The author's target was anti-maximalism, and it seems like the best alternative that they know of is a empirical intermediate theory. Okay, conclusion. Unsurprisingly, there are other ways to resist the arguments I have been developing other than Lewis's intermediate realism. One could, for example, insist that the only intelligible reading of the modal operators in SIE corresponds to metaphysical modality, while at the same time adopting the view that the ontological truths of metaphysics are metaphysically necessary, because of the myriad other candidate interpretations of such operators that have been defended by a wide variety of different philosophers: logical possibility, conceptual possibility, idealized conceivability, and other broader kinds of possibility than metaphysical possibility. Such a response strikes me as implausibly skeptical. Alternatively, one might question the possibility of quantifying over absolutely everything that there is, which was essential to the arguments I presented. That's what I was arguing about. What do you mean exactly by your plural objects over everything? Is that really a great idea. However, the possibility of unrestricted quantification has been explicitly defended by many metaphysicians engaged in the ontological debates I have been considering. Okay, so they're saying, yeah, sure, I'm just in that crowd. A common attitude to the denial of unrestricted quantification was expressed by Lewis himself when he wondered whether those who denied the possibility of unrestricted quantification needed to resort to the idea that some mystical censor stops us from quantifying over absolutely everything without restriction. Yeah, see, that's unfair. We can't really conceive of all the things, and so the idea that we're quantifying over everything is kind of a sleight of hand. We have epistemological limitations, and the idea that we can write down, like, oh yeah, we're talking about metaphysics now, we're quantifying over everything. That's like, well, I mean, it's not a metaphysical censor. It's like we are limited things. We do not have the idea that like we're just going to be able to talk about everything unproblematically is hubris, you know? Like, we like to talk about that stuff, but this is where we also run into problems. It's like, on one hand, this author has been using angels and like how many the size of the angels, how many angels are there in the world, but then on the other hand, we can then then they're saying, look, there's some mystical censor that stops us from quantifying over absolutely everything without restriction. Is it a good idea that we can talk about everything at all times? Strange. Anywho, my primary goal here, and this is the last little bit, my primary goal here has been to develop a way forward for philosophers who are committed to having non-arbitrary ontology, but who have yet to decide between maximalism and minimalism. There's a path toward minimalism that only rests on one methodological assumption: metaphysics shouldn't be arbitrary. Okie dokie. This was pretty good as far as this stuff goes. Yeah. I mean, you have to know something about what's going on in the logic. I mean, that's what they were just saying at the end. What are the things that are important? This modal operator, this box. If you have a different interpretation of the box, you can have a problem. I was raising the problem of this XX, what is a plurality, and whoopsie. So then they were saying, look, can you actually quantify over it? That's what the A is. I was arguing about this one right here. Where this arrow is, what exactly is a plurality? They don't define that. But like, this is the thing. If you actually want to do metaphysics in this sense, you have to be arguing over, like, these are the sorts of things. It's just a little picture. There's only so many things on the page. There's only like so many stuff. And look, and that's it. So you've got the two different kinds of quantifiers. You've got the modal operators and then the quantifiers. Then you've got two different kinds of objects. You got the singular objects and the plural objects. You've got sets here, and you can argue over that, but they weren't actually arguing over what a set is. But like, that's it. Like, these are the things that you're arguing over, and basically how you interpret them makes all the difference in what exists in your world. That's it. This mathematical philosophy can be very complicated, but also the ontology of it is not. You have to understand what the ontology is, and the ontology of this stuff. Even though they were talking about ontology of all the other things, all you're talking about there's only so many things on this page right here. Everything else is standard, like all the logical operators here. This is just like mathematical logic. This is all fine, but what are the actual things here? That we've got modal operators, how you interpret them, quantifiers, how you interpret them, and objects. And you've got singular objects and you've got plural objects. And you'll notice, like, what the fuck is a plural object? You don't normally think of like plural objects as single objects in the rest of the world, and that's what I was harping on this whole time. But again, you could reinterpret the other things too here, which is what they were talking about at the end there. Okay, you have any questions about this? I mean, it was just as far as this stuff goes, I think it was really good. They used pretty standard stuff. The plurality thing. The stuff on plurality, it's not like completely standard, but it is common enough. And then they were able to, where did I say it? Yeah, over here, where they were talking about concrete objects. They were able to widen their argument to talk about two other areas where you were talking about the metaphysics of objects, back to mereology, and then also possible worlds. So you're talking about science. And that was probably the best part of this essay, where they were able to shift from their basically technical abstract stuff to talk about different areas that might matter to other people. And but again, is anyone else going to believe them if they don't have the same views on plurality and modal operators and quantifiers? I don't know. But the people here, like these people, Yablo, Fine, Johnston, Kozlicki, and Fairchild, there's a good chance they do. I mean, I know Kit Fine cares about his logical operators. So, and so does Yablo. I don't know Johnston, Kozlicki, or Fairchild, but I assume they have the same sort of care about these sorts of things. And if they want to be able to maintain their position in the face of this argument, they're going to have to, have some opinion about the operators if they want to maintain their metaphysics. And these people do care about their metaphysics. So that's why this got published in a top journal, is that they took aim using a pretty standard technical tool set at some bigger other theories, and it was a straightforward enough theory that I'm able to I think I was able to express it to you guys. But yeah, so this is a top level analytic philosophy as far as I can well, this is what's conceived of as top level analytic philosophy, at least. So okay, so thank you. Let's do another paper.